Hey folks, so I have returned to the land of the living after a harrowing week and even more of tooth pain. I'm grateful to have gone to an endodontist who took care of me yesterday, pulled out all the infected material that was in my tooth down here, and basically my pain is gone, and so I am now able to function. It was, the root canal. If you've ever heard anything about a root canal, in general, a root canal is not that bad. I've had two of them, and this is now my second one. It's where they have to pull out all the living material inside your tooth, and it's kind of gross, but for as much pain as I was in, it was just sweet relief. So I'm just I'm not even on painkillers anymore. So I'm high on life, and not even on Vicodin. So anyway, apologies for missing our in-person time this week. I'm gonna or this past week, I'm gonna probably do at least two lectures, video lectures on Plato and Plato and Shunza. So let me get right to it and get us back to where we were, and then we'll be in class this coming week, and we'll just be going forward with the Plutarch and the Zhuangzi readings on the syllabus as normal. We'll be carrying forward. Okay, so back to the slides that are on our Sakai site that say Plato and Hanfei and Shunzi, something like that. I forget what the exact title is, but you'll see it there. And I think we're around slide number 17 or something like that. It's Callicles to the rescue of injustice, Namos versus Phusis. So this is where I had left off in lecture in person last time. So I was just talking about the way that Callicles is defending this notion of what it is to be a good person, and what gives meaning in human life is really to be true to one's nature, is to be true to especially the aggressive part of nature, which makes us unequal, which separates us into basically predators and prey in Callicles' view. And so he is very much of the mentality that the aggressive warrior, quote unquote, alpha types that we saw being presented in a certain favorable light in Homer. Again, that's assuming that Homer was showing that to endorse it. We, of course, have seen a number of ways of reading Homer that show maybe Homer wasn't actually doing that. But the kind of person that Callicles is takes that vision of aggressive Achilles, Agamemnon, Diomedes, Odysseus, and says, yes, that's what it is to be a true human, and really a true man, because Callicles has this very masculinist vision of what it is to be a human being. That is, if you are stronger, if you are mentally more agile, but also physically more stronger, you should be entitled to take whatever you can get and to use your strength. And of course, this connects in a certain way with what we saw about the Athenians saying in Thucydides. Their whole vision of their kind of national right to have an empire is very much grounded in this understanding that we see Callicles defending. And so Callicles says, as against Socrates, look, you're not a real man. If you're a real man, you go into business to make money, or you go into politics to win power, and you don't seek to philosophize. You don't try to ask questions and rile people up. So he, and we see him kind of hearkening back to this Homeric ethos. I also mentioned on the slide, though, that we've seen this increasingly in politicians like Donald Trump, but there are many others, especially in the United States, who have championed this view that, to be an academic, to philosophize, to be an anthropologist, to do things like that, which is just kind of to lead a life of the mind, which is resentful and is, resentful about the successes of other people in the real, quote unquote, real world. And that if you're really tough, if you're really strong, what you're going to do is you're going to test yourself in the real world of business, and that means there are winners and there are losers, and and the criticism that Trump and others make of academics is they're really just losers by nature, and they're afraid to really go out and test themselves, and so they retreat into the quote unquote ivory tower, where they don't have to compete against actually successful people in the real world. So Callicles' argument is very much akin to the kind of argument that we see folks, especially on the right, maybe not exclusively, but especially politicians on the right, make some of these same claims about the kind of disgraceful life of the humanities scholar or the philosopher, as opposed to the person who really is interested in testing themselves and competing and finding out if they really have what it takes to be a winner. Okay, so the next slide, that's Callicles on natural right. So Callicles says, this is on page 72, he actually gives us his definition of what one is entitled to by nature. So he believes in this idea that nature gives people kind of rights to certain things. And what that means is that you have a right to inequality in power and property. So if you are stronger, faster, smarter than others, then there's no reason that you shouldn't take more than others. You are essentially entitled to have more than others because of the way that you've been, gifted with different natural talents. Now, Socrates is going to use one of his rhetorical tactics, his argumentative tactics, to actually show that Callicles, whatever he thinks, he's actually giving a kind of ineffective definition at first. And this is where Socrates shows him that while Callicles is criticizing the demos, that is the many, that is the many people that make up the democracy, while Callicles is saying they all are weak as opposed to the few men who possess kind of real strength and are really willing to take risks, that those are the ones who are really powerful, and that the demos is not. Socrates is able to say, well, the problem for you, Callicles, is that in fact the many are stronger than the few. So no matter how you're measuring this in some way, you're going to have these few people who supposedly have a natural right to take more, but they actually have less power than the many. And so then he shows that Callicles' definition can't really make sense on that level because the many are going to be stronger than the few. So then by Callicles' own definition, that would mean the many have a right to sort of trample or crush the few. Well, Callicles doesn't want that. So Callicles can't actually accept that might makes right, because at least as stated, that would mean that the many could justly, by Callicles' own definition, oppress the few, which Callicles is absolutely not going to say, which suggests there is a problem with this definition. So also I just wanted to note here something about Socrates in his defense of the demos, or the democracy. So note that a lot of people will talk about Plato and Plato's version of Socrates as a critic of democracy. Remember, of course, Socrates being executed in the wake of a judicial verdict uttered by the democracy against him. And some of the things that Plato will have Socrates, the character, say in later dialogues like the Republic, it seems like Socrates was a really ardent critic of democracy. In fact, he consistently defends the democracy in the earlier works of Plato, the so-called Socratic dialogues that we think are closer to the historical Socrates, where he defends being a good Athenian citizen, which sometimes means opposing what the many say, but it always means that he thinks that what he's doing is in consonance with the kind of higher laws of the democracy, the real intent and purpose of the democracy. And so So Socrates actually defends this in a number of dialogues, and here again we can see in this dialogue the way that he implicitly defends the rough equalization of property, the way that the way that property is roughly evenly distributed in a democracy, even though there is still, rich and poor, but the many who are more or less poor do have a lot of power in Athens, and Socrates endorses that. And he also, endorses this idea that doing wrong is worse than suffering. That doing wrong is worse than suffering wrong, and the idea is absolutely that abiding by the wishes of the democracy, that is majority rule that puts things into law. Socrates absolutely endorses following those laws, and the basic equalization of property, as I say, rough equalization of property that Athens has at that time. So in this, for whatever he says about Pericles being a terrible politician, Socrates defends an idea of democratic citizenship, and he thinks he himself is the kind of model for what a good democratic leader should be, not Pericles. His criticisms of democracy are more about the leadership in democracies and not about the basic nature of a democracy, which he endorses both explicitly and implicitly in this dialogue. So at least that suggests that Plato is not pitting Socrates in any fundamental sense against democracy. This is I think, a simplistic version of Plato and Socrates that we sometimes get today. Anyway, so then Socrates is going to get Callicles to basically redefine what it means to be better. It's not just to be stronger, but it's basically to have these two virtues of cleverness and courage. So really, he's able to get Callicles to say, yeah, it's not really about who's strongest ultimately, because that would mean the many are stronger than the few, but it's about the clever and the courageous. So again, it's this image of a kind of, you could think about it, a successful, aggressive, initiative-taking, risk-taking person, and these are going to be fewer than most people, and they are going to be distinguished. In Callicles' view, they will distinguish themselves in success in politics, in warfare, in business. So these are the kind of people that he's talking about. So he actually does, even though it seems like, in a sense, he's making a kind of nihilistic argument, in a way he is trying to make an argument for what he thinks are the kind of superior qualities in human life, and it's not simply might makes right, but it's that doing it in a certain way, being the one who is more clever, who is more courageous, more risk-taking, that is really what Callicles thinks is more valuable, and that's really what it is to be better, and that's the thing that natural right attaches to. Okay, so then next slide, Callicles on the good life. So Callicles is going to defend a vision of the good life, which is basically these risk-taking types, the courageous and the clever, are then entitled, in his view, and actually should want to live out a life of sensual, self-indulgent freedom, is the quotation, and that's basically the purpose of human life. So it's not about just following the laws, because the laws are made by the sheeple, right? They're made by the weak, at least the weak of mind, the weak of heart, the weak of spirit. Even if altogether they are collectively stronger, but so it's do what you can to get a life of a life of pleasure, a life of self-indulgence, and so you're going to try to acquire money and political power in order to be able to get those sensual pleasures. And so if you have to be a criminal, or if you have to be a tyrant, if you have to seize political power illegally,